Why is the edge where transformation happens? Why do the most alive, the most formative experiences of a man's life consistently happen at the boundary between the self he is and the self he hasn't yet become? Let me start with something I've watched for 30 years. A man comes into my office, or onto my coaching call, or in an earlier chapter of my life into my confessional. He's not in crisis exactly. He's functioning. He has a job, a relationship, maybe even a gym membership he actually uses. From the outside, nothing is obviously broken, but there's something underneath it. A low-level, persistent dissatisfaction, a sense that he's living a version of his life that isn't quite the right one, that something is unresolved. Not a specific problem he can name and fix, just a restlessness. Maybe you recognize that. I want to talk about that restlessness today because I think it's one of the most consistently misread signals in a man's life. And what you do with it, or what's done to you with it, has a great deal to do with whether you ever become the man you're actually capable of being. The culture reads men's restlessness in two ways, and I submit to you that both of them are wrong. The first is the therapeutic reading. Restlessness in men, particularly in younger men, gets translated into a clinical diagnosis almost immediately. You can't settle down, you feel purposeless, you're dissatisfied without apparent cause, and the response is, let's talk about ADHD, or anxiety, or an attachment disorder from your early years. The goal in this framework is to manage the symptoms. Get the restlessness down to a tolerable level. Find a medication that quiets the signal. Learn to self-regulate so the discomfort doesn't interfere with you functioning in your day-to-day. I'm not dismissing mental health care. I've spent 30 years as a pastoral counselor, and I know the difference between a man who needs clinical support and a man who's been handed a clinical framework because his doctor didn't have another one to offer. My concern is this. When you treat restlessness like a pathology, you teach a man to silence a signal that may be the most important signal he's ever received. The second reading is the optimization reading, and this one lives primarily in the men's self-development world, which I'd argue ought to know better. In this framework, restlessness is fuel. It's motivation waiting to be channeled. The smart move is to harness it. Build a morning routine, set a 90-day goal, track your metrics, stack up those small wins. Restlessness isn't a problem, it's an asset. Put it to work. Believe me, I understand the appeal of this approach. I've used it myself and I recommend it to others. And I'd rather a man channel his restlessness into discipline than medicate it into silence. But the optimization approach makes the same fundamental error as the therapeutic one. It treats the restlessness as raw material to be managed rather than as a message to be read. You're not restless because you need a better morning routine. You're restless because you're built for something you haven't yet become. Those are not the same problem, and they do not have the same solution. There's research that speaks to this directly. The Institute for Family Studies released a major report this past spring on what they describe as America's demoralized men. And the single most important finding in it is this. What looks like apathy or disengagement in young men is, in the overwhelming majority of cases, frustrated aspiration. These men have worthy goals. They want to marry. They want meaningful work. They want to feel like adults living adult lives. They're not checked out, blocked, structurally, culturally, often internally, and they lack the formation to bridge the gap between the man that they are and the man those goals require. That's demoralization in the classical sense. Not apathy, frustrated aspiration. And if you're sitting there thinking, that's not just young men, that's me, you may be right. The demographics vary. The underlying problem doesn't. Restlessness is not malfunction. It is not raw material. It is a signal. It means something is unresolved between the man you are and the man you're built to become. And the only move that actually addresses it, is to follow the signal, not to silence it. Here's something I find genuinely interesting. Several people working in very different fields have stumbled onto the same piece of territory from entirely different directions, and none of them, to my knowledge, has fully named what they found. Steve Butler of the Flow Research Collective says that one of the most important conditions for getting into flow, for getting into your groove, is what he calls the sweet spot. That is, the task you're working on has to be just hard enough to demand your full engagement, not so far beyond your current ability that you give up in frustration, and not so far beneath it that you sink into boredom. Right at the edge of your present ability, that's where the best work happens. That's also where a man feels most fully alive and most fully himself. David Data, different tradition, different vocabulary entirely, arrives at essentially the same place. Push your edge, he says. Lean into your fear. The frontier of your discomfort is where transformation happens. I use that language myself a lot. It's earned its place. And the psychological research on self-verification, on how the mind uses identity claims to recruit behavior, finds the same thing again. The identity statement that actually changes a man is the one that's just slightly ahead of where he currently is. Not a description of the man as he already is in every moment, not a fiction about a man he's never been. The statement that sits right at the edge of his believability, that's the one that does the work. 3 fields, 3 different methodologies, the same finding. The edge is where it happens. Now, why? Why is the edge where transformation happens? Why do the most alive, the most formative experiences of a man's life consistently happen at the boundary between the self he is and the self he hasn't yet become? Kotler gives you a neurological account. Data gives you an energetic one. The self-verification researchers give you a cognitive one. Each of these is accurate as far as it goes, but I want to suggest that they're each describing the same underlying reality from different angles, and that the most precise account of that reality isn't neurological or energetic or cognitive anthropological. The human person is constitutionally oriented toward an end he hasn't yet reached. That is not a motivational framework. It is a description of what a human being actually is. It is what you're hardwired to be. You're the kind of creature that is by nature incomplete in the direction of something else. The incompleteness is not a defect. It's structural. It is baked into the very fiber of who you are. St. Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century called it epectasis, the soul's infinite stretching toward God, in which every attainment becomes not a destination, but a new threshold. The man who arrives in Gregory's account has not finished. He's just found his next beginning. And of course, the bleeding edge is where transformation happens, because the edge is where you are most fully who you are, in motion toward what you're for. Of course the restlessness is a signal. Of course silencing it is a mistake. You cannot treat the defining feature of a human being as a symptom to be managed. Not without cost. This is not a new insight. It is, in fact, a very old one. And it was already said once, much better than I can say it. St. Augustine of Hippo, writing at the end of the 4th century, opens his Confessions, which remains one of the most honest books a man has ever written about the interior life, with a prayer that is also a diagnosis. He writes this: "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." He is not offering comfort. He is offering a causal account. Your restlessness is not incidental. It is built into you because you are built for something beyond yourself. The edge is not accidental. The dissatisfaction is not a malfunction. It is the signature of a being whose orientation exceeds his present state. Butler found the edge. Data found the edge. Augustine names the reason the edge exists. So here's what this means for you practically. If you've been reading your restlessness as a symptom, stop it. It's not a symptom, it's data. The question isn't how to quiet it. The question is, what is it pointing toward? If you've been treating it as fuel, fine, it can serve that function. I've used it that way myself, but that's not all that it is. A man who only channels his restlessness without ever asking what it means will find himself very efficiently going somewhere he never intended to go. The work of this show and the work I do with men begins here, with the recognition that the restlessness is a signal, that the signal means something, and that becoming the man the signal is pointing toward requires formation, not just motivation, formation. There's a difference, and we'll spend a lot of time on that. So that's what we're doing here. That's what Fire and Iron is for. Before the next episode, I want you to find a quiet moment and finish this sentence. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that feels unfinished in my life right now is... The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that feels unfinished in my life right now is... I'd like you to write for 3 minutes. Don't stop. Don't correct yourself. Then read what you wrote and ask, is this restlessness or is it a signal? If this lands for you, if you like what you're hearing, like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to keep up with the other things that I do, subscribe to the newsletter. The link is in the description below. Next week, courage. Why it's the gateway virtue, what it actually asks of a man, and why without it, everything else we'll discuss will be only theoretical. I'll see you then.